Hello, I'm Susan Brooks. Welcome to my home here in Louisville, Colorado. And this is where I harvest about 90% of my dye material. But today we'll be talking about how to bind a book and the weaving. This technique was taught to me by Dorothy Caldwell, and it's probably my favorite way to bind a book. So let's get started. A few of the bindings that we will be looking at also in the book that we will not be talking about are bindings that are hard bound, and there are two spines in there, one in the front, in the inside of the book, and one on the outside of the book. And also, when you do the weaving binding, you can add beads to them or leave them just hanging plain. And when you do a smaller book, like this little bitty book, you can actually, you don't need the 5 holes. This one has 4. You can do 3 holes of weaving on there if you like. And the first thing you're going to do is, after you dye your papers, and I always throw a piece of fabric into the dye pot at the same time that I do my papers, so that I have fabric that corresponds with it, is I go through all of my papers and choose the ones that I like. And then I go ahead and I do embellishments on those. I do my artwork on those. I always make some kind of a fabric piece that I'm going to put on the outside or in the inside, or just pieces of fabric to put in there. They're just kind of cool for the texture. And I usually dye several different types of watercolor paper, so that, again, to add texture to our book when we're finished. And so we'll be binding this book today, and going through specifics of how to make the holes, how to bind the edging of those holes. This one I've already pre-bound, and then how to assemble them in the weaving method. We are now going to learn how to make a template using paper rather than having to measure everything. So we simply take our book and we cut a piece of paper the length of our spine, and we take that piece of paper, we are going to fold it into fifths, which is the instructions I have in the book. And it's simply folding it in the middle and folding each of those middle pieces into 1/3, marking those with our lines. We always want to make sure we identify the top of our template, either with the number system or with an arrow, so that we are always putting it on the top of our page of our book. We can also take that same piece of paper and we can turn it into a 4-hole template, and that's this is a 3-hole template, and that one is simply just folding it in half, folding each of your halves in half, marking your lines, and you have a 3-hole template. You can also do a 4-hole template, and that is just simply rolling your paper 5 times until you get the 4 lines to identify where your 4 holes are. So you're going to take your papers and you're going to lay them out and continue to sort through them until you get good texture, and from page to page. Your middle page, you want it to be appealing, and then once you do that, that's when you go ahead and put the paper clips on. And after the paper clips are on, identify your marks. And after your marks are identified, you're going to either use an awl. If you have fabric, you're going to use your sharp darning needle. If you just have paper, your sharp darning needle will go through it. Since this one has fabric on it, I'm going to go ahead and use my awl, and as I poke my hole through, I want to make sure it comes out on the fold line, both the inside of the book and the outside of the chapter. And yes, I know these are called signatures, but I prefer to call them chapters because they are chapters in my books. I measure my thread wax thread 2.5 times the width of my spine. Thread my sharp darning needle. Starting on the outside of the chapter, I go in through hole 3. Nope. On the outside of my chapter, I go in through hole 3. Back up through hole 2. Back to the inside of the book on hole 1. Back to hole 2. Hole 3. Hole 4. And hole 5. And if your threads are way off, you can go back in and readjust them. If not, just tie a square knot, which is right over left, left over right. And voila, you have one chapter ready. You can go ahead and take your paper clips off at this point. And we have one more chapter to bind. Now that I have my 4 chapters put together, I'm ready to bind the book. At this point, the most important part is to make sure that my holes are all lined up. And we can squish with it later on and make it lined up. I go ahead and I put rubber bands to hold it all into place and put these extra strings hanging down underneath this rubber band to keep them out of the way. I'm going to cut a piece of thread, and if it's not long enough, it's okay. We'll be able to put additional thread in later on. That's not a big deal. But for now, I have the front of my book. This is going to be the front. This is going to be the back. That's going to be the top. That's going to be the bottom. And I'm going to start up here at hole number 1, way up there. And that's where I'll start. I'm going to cut my wax thread, and my wax thread will be approximately 2.5 arm lengths. So that's quite a bit, and it's kind of difficult to work with at the very first, but because it's wax thread, it's not that difficult to keep it from getting tangled up. I'm going to be using my tapestry needle to weave with because it's got a dull end on it, and I don't want to take my threads that I'm weaving through and use that sharp needle to be slicing up my wax thread as I'm going. So the best needle to use is just a dull needle at this point. Now I'm going to take off my top rubber band so that I can get into the first inside hole. And you can put it into the middle of your book, you can put it on the first page, the second page. I usually put it about the second page. It doesn't really matter, whatever your preference is. But I'm going to go ahead and get it to come through that same hole. Pull and pull and pull until I have about that much thread left in the middle of my book. Put my rubber band back on and start to weave. And the weaving is literally just what it says it is, a weave. I'm going to go under, over, under, over. and then the opposite for the next one around. Because it is over the top of that, I'm going to put it under, over, under, over. And because it is over that, under, over, over. And I'm just going to continue to do this all the way through what I call the first section, which is from there to there. Now, if I make this weaving too tight, it's very difficult to close my book all the way, and it tends to fan out. So I try to keep the weaving of these about the width from there to there. And as you might have read in my book, I say I am not a firstborn, I am not a perfectionist, and life does not need to be perfect. The nice thing about working with the wax thread is that when it's a little bit longer, so that it's not a tension type cold weave, the wax thread tends to fold better and look a little nicer. It looks like some extra thread in there. When I get to the end of section 1, I'm just going to simply slip down to section 2. Nothing fancy about it, just a little bit of a slip, and just continue on with my weaving. And you can see why you need a dull needle so that you don't poke into things. So at this point you can tell I am out of string and I'm going to need to cut myself a new string. I can literally just put it back in that hole and then tie them off on the inside, or I can weave it through this area in here and bring it back up to my starting place. And again, I'm not a perfectionist, so in there. Go ahead and just cut, and you really can't see it very well, so I'm not worried about it being perfect. Just push it back into that hole and tie it off later when I'm done. And now I can tie it off in there. Now I'm ready to start just picking up where I left off. until I'm finished. So 1, 2, 3 sections are done. I've got the 4th section. Okay, now that I'm finished, because I started this next string down in this hole, I only have to weave this up and a couple of these here, and I can put it down, whoops, get it up through there. I need to make sure that my needle is threaded. Now I can put it down through that same hole, and because I put it into this spot, I need to make sure it comes back up through that spot. And voila, I can tie that one off. Square knot, right over left. And this string can be cut off, left, or beaded itself. Now the other one, you can tell that I have the second string way over here. You gotta pull that over there. So I'm gonna take this string and pull it back. And tie that one off. And again, they can be cut, they can be left, or they can be beaded. Now, the other way to have done this is to have started in this hole, ended in this hole, and just simply taken the 2 strings and pulled them together and tied them off. And then you just have one long string. But I kind of prefer having them in their same holes. And voila! My book is now finished. Look through it. So you can see that the pages have lots of texture on them. Left a paper clip on that. It doesn't need to be there. My book is finished.